Hello there to anyone who's listening. I just wanted to make a quick video, haven't done one of those in a while, about the current situation in, Russian-Ukraine war, specifically regarding recent developments about the Ocheretyne offensive that has been going on this past month. Well, first of all, I should probably take you back through this year's advances, first of all. As you can see, in January, the Russians continued their offensive kind of westward from Kharkov, however you pronounce it, in essence trying to go underneath Pokrovsk, which did certainly go well for them. You can see January's advancements there. And they continued going west here throughout February. Now, what's quite interesting is then what happens after this, where through January and February you see quite a few advancements in, this kind of region, but through the time of March you see barely any movement at all. Now you get both pro-Ukrainian, pro-Russian sources on this. You hear pro-Ukrainian saying that this is significant proof that Russia's advance is stalling. You can see through these two, you can see how far they advanced January, then February. They still advanced quite far, but it's significantly less. And then March, you can see there's barely any change in the front lines. What we do know, however, is that the reason why there's so few advancements down there is because the Russians took off quite a few of their troops to commit to the, recapture of Sudza and the destruction of all of Ukraine's holdings in Kursk, which you see they essentially dedicate the entire month of March to. And then after that, it's slow moving, bits in April. I think that's about as far as they really go. So you see, through March, they take troops away from the Donetsk region to essentially liberate Sudza. Now, that does mean that then after they retake Sudza, they move their troops back down south. But by now, they've already reached kind of the border with, what's this again? Dnipropetrovsk, I think it's called. Dnipro state. And there's not really much point in continuing to go west. So that's why, starting in April, they instead have their troops mass here, north of Ocheretyne, and begin advancing north, which you can see April and then the start of May. They have significant advancements here. Yeah. Now, you do see quite a few people asking about why they're doing a specific offensive here, and I believe I understand why. And that's mainly these two cities here, Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka. Now, you can see this kind of more clearly on live UA map, but the reason that the Russians are pushing up this way is so they can threaten both cities simultaneously. In essence, the Ukrainians now currently have to choose between defending Konstantinivka or Pokrovsk. If they, say, put more troops in Konstantinivka, the Russians will simply swing down to the west and start marching around Pokrovsk, similar to how they took Selidov, however you pronounce that. And if the Ukrainians instead decide to fortify Pokrovsk and the nearby settlements, the Russians actually have a much better chance of taking Konstantinivka, because they have the three-pronged assault from Chasiv Yar, Toretsk, and this new Ocheretyne offensive. Now, number one thing that you should be noting about this front here is this small reservoir here. This essentially acts as a sort of buffer, because you obviously can't go across this, well, not with tanks at least, or any significant supplies, which means that what you see here on this map, as I think what the Russians are trying to, what their strategy for this region is, which is to essentially connect both sides up with this reservoir and cut off this entire southern area, which would obviously be disastrous for the Ukrainians, similarly to essentially a second Avdiivka. Now, I doubt the Ukrainians are going to let this happen. They're probably going to put massive fortifications in these two cities here to defend this road, and they'll just retreat along that. But I do believe that this southern region here will probably fall sometime around June, and then after that there's not really much in the way of Konstantinivka, especially since Chasiv Yar is high ground, and the battle for that, while very slow, would definitely pick up in case of an attack on Konstantinivka. Now, if the Ukrainians decide to fortify this city, the Russians can then instead advance along the H32 highway along here, marching towards Pokrovsk, which would also be quite disastrous. And, well, that's kind of the problem that Ukraine's facing at the minute. Which way should they defend? Because on the one hand you have Pokrovsk being this sort of symbolic city that needs to be defended, and you have Konstantinivka, which, if the Russians take Konstantinivka, they can just simply keep marching north through the rest of these cities here. It's in that regard that I believe that the Ukrainians will more likely try to defend Konstantinivka, even if that is at the expense of Pokrovsk. If I had to assume what's going to happen in the next couple of months, I'd believe that the Russians would march north, kind of around into these areas here, to do another semi-encirclement, similar to what they did in Selidov, like I said. Either way, I don't think that the Ukrainians are going to have a very good time, but the Russians will also certainly not have a great time, given that they're certainly making less progress than they wanted to. But, well, that's kind of it, really. There's not really much else to say other than recent announcements that Russia wants the entire border region with Ukraine to be a sort of buffer. Now, I didn't really understand what they said, but I assume that they're making reference to a similar type of situation of Vovchansk, where they want to essentially occupy the entire border region to prevent any other Sudza incursion. But just like with the Vovchansk offensive supposedly wanting to capture Kharkiv, we'll have to wait and see if that comes to anything. But yeah, I think that's about it for this update. Well, the first update that I've done. So, see ya.